Hey guys, this is part 3 of 3 and final video on the valve cover replacement for the following 3MZ-FE engine cars. In the first video, I showed step-by-step instructions on all the parts that you had to take apart, move aside, or completely remove in order to be able to remove both front and back valve covers. Since this is a fairly big DIY job, this is the perfect time to also do some important maintenance work because you already have everything taken apart. Therefore, the second video covered all the important maintenance work that I performed. In this third and final video, I'll reassemble everything back with special emphasis on the rear valve cover, which is the most difficult part of this project.
By the way, if you gotta be under the car, you see where I jacked up, and I have the floor jack just in case. Don't rely on floor jack alone, please.
Before we can install the rear valve cover, it's important to thoroughly clean the gasket mating surface. But visual access to some of the important areas are nearly impossible. Therefore, I strongly recommend using a small mirror like this with a long handle to confirm the following to avoid introducing fresh oil leak after this hard work. First, ensure that surface is clean. Second, RTV gasket is applied correctly. Third, the valve cover and gasket is installed correctly. In part 1 video, I discussed things I've done to create extra space to be able to remove the rear valve cover. Well, for reinstallation, you're gonna need a little bit more space to not disturb the gasket and RTV that you just applied. So let me recap what I did. It's really important for you to test the fitment of installing the rear valve cover before you apply the RTV and installing the gasket so that you don't disturb them until the final install. And this will give you a chance to move more things out of the way to make more room for reinstallation. By the way, during this entire project, I disconnected the negative terminal on the battery. This is to not disturb anything during this project, like having the high pressure fuel pump come on when I open the interior door, especially because I'll be removing fuel injectors and would like fuel line to not have any pressure to avoid any gasoline leak onto the engine. Although I was able to remove the rear valve cover with the fuel rail intact, the height of the fuel rail prevented valve cover to slide in at a flatter angle. So I loosened the fuel rail bracket bolts and disconnected all the fuel injector connectors, and that allowed me to get this out of the way. And since I have everything taken apart, I thought, when would I find motivation again to take this thing apart just to clean the fuel injectors? So I went ahead and removed the fuel injectors as well to both clean and to replace 19-year-old rubber O-rings.
Just gonna lightly put WD-40 on there. Okay, made it come out easy. You need maximum clearance here. The problem is this thing right here, it's getting in the way. The problem here is this, if you look inside here, this is put in inside of this insulation tape, just part of it. I'm gonna see if I can use a razor blade and carefully just cut the back side of this. Oh, there. You see, now I can spin it up. I just cut maybe about a ½ inch on both sides and not going through this black piece here. This is just the insulation tape. So by peeling it back like that, that allowed me to spin this up. If I would have done that before I removed the valve cover gasket, that would have gotten me some extra space. Also, I tied another zip tie here, so now I have 3. So I'm using this Permatex Ultra Black. On the corner there, that's a little bit hard to reach with this, so I'm just gonna apply by hand.
Apply a thin 1/16 to 1/8 inch coat of RTV silicone to both left and right edges, and then use a mirror to check that RTV is applied evenly.
It's hard to put silicone back there because I can't really see, so I use the mirror. See? So it's not perfect, but I got it. I got a very thin coat on that edge and on this side as well.
Once I loosened things to make more room, it was definitely less struggle to put the real valve cover back on. But on first attempt, the valve cover felt a bit wobbly.
I feel something's not right. This doesn't feel right, guys. I wonder if the gasket came out on the opposite side. Yeah, gasket came out the opposite side.
So I had to take it out to reseat it again. Anytime you attempt to install the rear valve cover, the RTV silicone can be disturbed, so I had to check and reapply in some spots. And in the second attempt, the valve cover set in nice and flat. So I hand tightened all the valve cover bolts. Now, before you continue to install everything back together, it's really important that you go under the car and confirm that the gasket is installed properly. Otherwise, you could still have oil leak and have to repeat this laborious process again. Be sure to go crisscross pattern when tightening all the bolts to ensure that the gasket is squeezed evenly on all sides. You can access all bolts from the top, but for the upper left corner bolt, you'll have better access from the bottom of the car.
Again, ratchet type. I don't think I'm gonna be able to measure the torque on this one, so it's gonna get a kind of snug. Okay, I think that's good enough.
Initially, I tried to tighten all bolts snugly by the feel of the hand, and I was going to come back and torque them to the spec. That's when I became quite shocked to break the bolt on the upper right corner with what I felt was just a slight snug pressure. I don't know why I was thinking 18 foot-pounds in my head, because when I checked the torque spec, it was only 8 foot-pounds. What a nightmare to have a broken bolt embedded to the engine block in the location that is very difficult to access. Luckily, upon close examination, I can see that about 1/8 of an inch of broken bolt that was sticking out, so using a vice grip plier, I was just able to grab onto the edge of the bolt, but it kept coming off whenever I tried to turn. But eventually I was able to get it turned just a little bit by little bit until it came out. My wife was video recording this work when this happened, and I already told her that if I can't get it out, the car would have to be towed to a shop to get it fixed. So when the bolt came out, we both let out a big celebratory scream. Ha ha ha. Afterwards, I immediately picked up the replacement bolt from a Toyota dealer so I can finish this project that weekend. Needless to say, I ended up having to install the rear valve cover 4 times. Can you believe it? First, to test the fitment. Second, to correct the gasket that came out. Third, to remove and replace the broken bolt. Fourth, to do the final install. Next, I installed the spark plugs. The spark plugs for this car is NGK Iridium IFR 6A-11. You'll need a 5/8 inch deep socket with magnet inside so that the spark plug doesn't drop into the hole and potentially change the gap size. The torque for spark plugs are 13 foot-pounds. Once the plugs are installed, insert the ignition coil over the plugs and then tighten the 10mm ignition coil bolts to 5 foot-pounds. And while at it, don't forget to connect the wiring connectors and tighten the wiring harness nut shown in the video. OEM PCV valve is only like 12 bucks and it serves many important functions. So if it's more than a couple of years old, do replace it at this time. You'll need a deep 19mm socket for this. Also, later when we install the Plenum, don't forget to connect the hose between the PCV and the Platinum. Initially, my PCV hose wasn't connected fully, and I was getting check engine light and rough engine. Reassembling the fuel rail and injectors were covered in part 2 video, but I forgot to include torque specs. The torque for 4 bolts on the fuel rail is 8 foot-pounds, and the torque for the fuel inlet pipe is 22 foot-pounds. Note that you have to fully reassemble the fuel rail before installing the Platinum because the Platinum will cover the backside of the fuel injectors.
So these two holes here, they're supposed to be 14 millimeter there and 12 millimeter there. But once I set it, I don't think the holes are lining up. So I took it out. I might have to loosen the bottom of the bracket to make it a little bit more flexible so that I can adjust it and get it screwed in here first before I tighten it. So to get the intake manifold or plenum in, you're just gonna align two holes here, okay? To this stud there and that stud there. And we're gonna get a couple of nuts there, and then on forefront, there's gonna be Allen bolts. Don't forget the PCV valve hose here. That's gotta be connected. And also, I'm just trying to see the back bracket. Remember, there were three. Trying to see if that's gonna align to the hole. On this one looks okay. The one in the middle here, I'm not sure that's actually aligning. I might have to loosen the bottom and then bolt in here. So I might have to go down under the car first and make sure that gasket seats nicely. Okay, so I'm lying down under the car. You really need to get one of these ratchet type wrenches because there's not a lot of room down here. I can do this with this. I've tightened most of it. Just wanted to demonstrate that this ratchet type socket wrench fits here nicely. Okay, got that one. The other one is here. Okay, and you can tighten it with this. There's another bracket here, remember? I'm tightening it with hand right now. Yeah, this one you can get a regular ratchet in there. That one is 14 millimeter. Let me see if I can get a camera up in there. Like that. And once that's in there, you can do it like this.
So the most difficult part about the Plenum install is challenging access to both top and bottom bracket bolts. Note that I had to loosen the bottom bracket bolts so that the bracket can be wiggled around a bit to be able to get the bolt lined correctly to the bracket and to the back side of the Plenum. In order to keep this video short, I'm going to refer you to the part 1 video for the rest of the installation of Plenum, throttle body, and air filter housing, which are pretty straightforward, and they are in exact reverse order from uninstallation steps that were covered in part 1 video.
This thing here, that's gonna go sit over there. If you look over here, here's the part number. I believe this is the EGR Vacuum solenoid valve. Anyway, this part completely broke off. I had to fetch that out of this small hose. And then I used the crazy glue and baking soda. And this thing is pretty solid now. I think these are about 40 bucks or so, and they don't have it in stock, so you have to wait. And I don't want to wait to assemble this car, so I patched it up. I think it's gonna be good. I put a very thick layer of, I used almost entire crazy glue, the small packet, and put a lot of, mixed it with baking soda. I probably put about 8 layers, so I think it's gonna be pretty solid. Okay, I got the tube seals and gaskets on, and I applied very thin layer of Permatex Ultra Black. I think this is the best stuff to use. A little bit more expensive than others. So I got silicone on the edges as well, all ready to go. Line up the tube holes here.
First, I confirmed that both valve cover and tube seal gaskets are settled into place correctly, and then I hand tightened the valve cover bolts and then torqued them to 8 foot-pounds. Note that I'm missing one bolt because I used it to replace the broken bolt on a back valve cover, and I need to go buy another one. For front spark plugs, again, I used a deep 5/8 inch socket with a long extension and hand tightened them first and then torqued them to 13 foot-pounds. Next, install the ignition coils over the spark plugs and then hand tighten the 10mm bolts and then torque them to 5 foot-pounds, and finally connect the ignition coil connectors. As you do this project, you're gonna come across rubber hoses that doesn't feel like a rubber hose anymore, and a lot of them don't want to come out easily. So if you apply WD-40 or some kind of penetrating oil and let it sit for a few minutes, you'll have a chance to pull them out. But this one would not come out, and my act of trying to pull it out actually broke it. And since this is just an air ventilation hose, I replaced it with the one shown on the screen. Also, if you haven't done so by now, don't forget to install the strut bar and also refill the coolant. Because I work a pretty busy full-time job, I get to work on this just a few hours here and there on the weekend. So it took several weeks to complete everything, which was okay since this is just an extra car. But by taking so many things apart and doing so many maintenance work at the same time, by this time, I'm both a little bit anxious and nervous as to whether I put back everything correctly and how well the engine's gonna run. So after connecting the battery, the car started up immediately. Other than seeing some smoke come out of the exhaust from cleaning carbon buildup on intake valves with cleaning solutions, engine ran pretty good. However, as it started to warm up, the check engine light came on and engine ran a little bit rough. I also heard a loud hissing sound from the PCV area because the PCV hose had fallen off. Once I reconnected the PCV hose, the engine obviously ran smooth and much better than before I did all the work. So I drove it for about 30 minutes and then checked for any oil leak from both top of the engine and from the bottom of the car, and it was bone dry. The only final work that was left was to do full engine degreasing to remove remaining oil sludges and stains from the previous oil leak. This is also to ensure that I don't scare off the next buyer with previous oil leak stains.
There's four 10mm, I think two are nuts and two are bolts you have to remove, and then this will come off, and I need to take that off so I can get at all the oil sludge in the back. Okay, I got the top cover removed. I had to push this bottom heat shield out to be able to take out the top part. Everything is still hot, which is just the way I want it, because the engine has to be a little bit hot for the engine degreaser to work. You can see just how much oil leak was there before. So from the bottom side, I cleaned as much as I can. So this is and the top side, I cleaned as much as I can. So this is really what's left, the front here. So I'm gonna wrap some of the connectors here. I'm good with the top side, I've already cleaned it. I'm gonna clean below the valve cover. So we got a couple of connectors there, so I'm gonna wrap some aluminum foil that area. And I think that's it. And then maybe I cover the alternator here as well.
As you can see, it's good to keep around a long spray straw for situations like this. That long red straw came from seafoam spray that I used before. I spray it everywhere, wherever I see previous oily gunks, and use the brush to agitate the buildup to loosen them, particularly in hard to clean spots. I let the degreaser penetrate and break down the oil sludge for a few minutes, and then used microfiber towel to wipe off all the gunk. Normally, I like to spray the water with a garden hose, but since I already cleaned the top, I didn't want dirty particles to be sprayed all over the top area, so I chose to wipe it down by hand. I repeated spraying, brushing, and wiping it clean several times to a point where the hot engine doesn't produce smoke or steam from heavy oil sludges that coated the entire engine and underside. Once it was all clean, the engine no longer produces oil burning smoke or smell, which I used to notice from inside the cabin. I already have three passenger sedans, and I always wanted to replace one of them to an SUV, so I thought hard about keeping this car, especially after all the hard work I had put into it. But in the end, I decided that I wanted a newer used Lexus RX350 instead, so I ended up doing more work on this car in preparation for a sale, and that'll be covered in the next video. Looking back, I thought I had taken about 100 videos, but when I counted, it was actually over 200 videos. Therefore, it took a long time to find particular video clips and then assembling them in a series of short and concise, yet comprehensive storyline. If this video was helpful, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.